9715.
Hello again, and welcome to Bigfoot for Breakfast, home of the mysterious and the macabre, where we hang out in the studio every week challenging conventional thought. We are your hosts, Sarah Jones
and Samantha Carter.
We are very happy for you to be joining us this week to hear yet another weird story, and we do indeed have a weird one for you. If you haven't ever done so, if you could pretty please rate and review our show on whichever podcast platform you happen to be listening from, we would appreciate that tremendously. It really helps out the show a ton, and we love hearing from you guys. You can also add us on Facebook, Twitter, and Snapchat for updates and contest announcements also. And if you really want to tell us how you feel, good or bad, you can leave us a voicemail. Just call 641-812-2635, leave your message, and we'll play it on the next episode. This week, we did get a voicemail from a listener named Carl.
Hi, Samantha and Sarah from Bigfoot for Breakfast. My name is Carl, and I'm calling from Arizona. I just recently discovered your guys' podcast about a week ago, I want to say, and I just want to say that I've been enjoying it super duper much. I work pretty early morning shifts at my job, and a lot of times I am by myself in a storeroom just packaging boxes, and I think your podcasts are really funny and really great and super interesting too. They keep me company. Sometimes they freak me out. I'm not going to lie. The shadow people, that freaks me out a little bit, but your guys' humor really helps, just break it down and make it super enjoyable. So I just wanted to let you guys know that I really enjoy your podcast, and I'm going to be so sad when I finally catch up on all the episodes, because so far I've just been binging it at work because it's just super duper fun. And I hope that I get to hear more from you guys and that y'all keep doing what you're doing, because I am enjoying it. Okay, that is all I have to say. I hope y'all have a lovely day or night, whatever it is when you hear this. And yeah, thank you so much for being super cool and keep being cool. Bye.
Aw, thank you so much, Carl. We're really glad that you left a message for us, and we're even more glad that we can help you pass the time while you're at work and keep you entertained, so thank you for listening.
We think you're really cool, too.
This week's story comes from a great suggestion from a listener and a Facebook friend, Oscar, so thank you so much for the show suggestion. We had actually never heard of this, and the more we read about it, the more intrigued we became, so we thought it would be perfect to share it all with you guys this week.
It kind of worked out because we wanted to do an episode about giants, just like a complete analysis of the giant situation, but this really added to the story because I had never heard anything about this situation.
And they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, The land through which we have all gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw in it are men of great stature. And there we saw Nephilim, the sons of Anak, and we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them. Numbers 13:33.
As we all well know, we have been involved in a war in the Middle East for quite some time now. There's an Air Force base located in the southern part of Afghanistan, only 16 kilometers from Kandahar city. It's called the Kandahar International Airport. This base has been present in the area since way before the war started after 9/11, though. It was actually built sometime in the 50s or 60s by the United States when they were preparing for and anticipating a war with the Soviet Union.
Now, obviously, we have never served in the Air Force, but we did some reading up on the base at Kandahar, and it seems to be a pretty diverse place. There are 20 different nationalities stationed here, and apparently it sits right in one of the most dangerous parts of the country. But while it's considered super dangerous because of the contentious atmosphere, being a war zone and all, there's actually another reason to fear the vast hillsides and remote terrain surrounding this area. According to Afghan legend, there is something out there in those hills.
In an article written for Business Insider by Kathleen Reedy, she appears to have interviewed a few Afghan folks who were working in the area as local police officers. Kathleen holds a PhD in social anthropology from Penn State. She was deployed to Iraq and to Afghanistan to assist the military to understand the culture and society of the area. She also lived and worked in both Egypt and Syria, so she seems like a pretty credible source here. They took her out on patrol with them, and during this time, they came across a marker in a remote area. It appeared to be a grave. She asked one of the officers about it, and he told her that the 20-meter-long grave was the burial site of a giant who was famous in the area. She was skeptical at first when the other officer told her that there had been giants everywhere, and it wasn't so long ago in this region, as recent as 80 years. So of course she's thinking that they are simply referring to people who had been exceptionally tall. We have people like that in the United States too, some reaching 7 feet and higher. No, they told her. They were referring to an actual giant. Not just tall people, giants. The 20-meter-long grave was significant enough, but they went on to tell her that this one wasn't even one of the big ones. This one was relatively small in comparison to some of them.
So these guys were telling her that some of them would reach approximately 30 meters in height. For those of us who don't measure in meters, this is 98 feet. 98 feet. That's not an abnormally tall person. That's a giant. Her skepticism continued, and for good reason. It's not a good thing to believe everything you hear. We know that. She simply thought that the locals were screwing with her, telling her a tall tale. But the Afghan people who were telling her this story quickly became insulted by her doubt. They took this as her calling them liars. It sounds like this was definitely not her intention, but they were obviously very angry about this and yelling at her. Even the interpreter who was present to help her along was mad that she would so casually deny what they were saying.
Just their angry reaction was enough to change her mind. The interpreter explained that this was only 80 or so years ago for them. People remembered this. It wasn't just a legend that was passed down from generation to generation. She was accusing people who were still alive and claimed this to be true of lying. These were their grandparents who had told them about this. This was something that they knew to be true. She saw this grave and its markers herself.
But that isn't even where it ends. There is another story that has been told several times over the years about an event that occurred as recently as 2002 and involves U.S. troops. Several, in fact, who have corroborated this story. Even though this is said to have occurred in 2002, buzz about it didn't really start until about 2015 or 2016, and we'll explain what we think the reason for that is pretty soon. There's a guy named L.A. Marzulli who has been studying the giants of lore for many years, about 4 decades to be more exact. More specifically, he's been studying the Nephilim, who were a people of giant proportions mentioned throughout the Bible many times, and are described as the offspring of sons of God and the daughters of men. The sons of God referred to here is dominantly believed to have been the angels. So I think we've all basically got an understanding of the Nephilim concept.
Yeah, I think for the most part.
And we discussed it as well in the exorcism episode.
Yep.
So if you haven't heard that one, go back and listen to it.
Yeah, it's good. It's a good one.
We're all good.
They're all awesome.
Totes.
That's awful.
Totes my goats. Totes full of goats.
I have a goat.
You do have a goat.
We could put her in a tote.
We'd have to have a pretty good tote. She's pretty fat.
She would be pissed. She would not enjoy
Annie
that.
would not enjoy being in a tote.
So the story goes that in 2002, there was a special forces team patrolling the hillside of Afghanistan near Kandahar when they came across a cave, which is really nothing unusual since the area is littered with caves all over. From what we understand, the military was routinely inspecting these caves and destroying them after they were cleared. There was a mission in 2002 called Operation Mountain Lion, in which 3 different companies would search the caves because there were intelligence reports that members of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda were holing themselves up in the caves as they moved further into the region, according to a CNN news article.
Fake news.
Infantry soldiers would search the caves and retrieve anything they found before exploding them with C4 and anti-tank weaponry.
How fun would that job be?
That's literally what I was going to say. Like, that sounds great. You want to go explode some caves? Well, yeah.
Explode.
Let's go explode things. I'd be all about it. What a good time.
Right.
I bet it wasn't.
Good times. Good times. It'd be really hot.
It'd be so hot. And it's really sandy. And I've heard that you get really sweaty and all that sand blows around and you're just covered in sand all day. Since the CNN article talking about the cave searches was written about the same time the events we're talking about today happened, we can only assume that this is why this particular team was patrolling the area in the first place.
Apparently, Marzulli went overseas to interview some of these people who were directly involved in the incident. So, here's the story. On one of these routine expeditions to seek out and investigate caves in the area of Kandahar, one of the units goes missing. It just never comes back. Typically, in a situation where a unit goes missing and gets into some sort of trouble, there's at least some sort of radio correspondence indicating this or a distress signal. With this missing unit, there was nothing at all. It just disappeared. Another unit was dispatched to go look for them. A rescue mission, so it seemed.
I was kind of associating the CNN article, Operation Mountain Lion. That's what this unit was out doing, was just exploring these remote caves and then exploding them, and then they just never come back. Nothing.
Exploded. So the area that they would be searching was super remote. They couldn't get there only by ground. They had to fly 4 kilometers to a base there and then patrol on ground from there. So it sounds like they were patrolling on the ground for a pretty long time, up and down hills, and as they came over a particularly large hill, they spotted what appeared to be a trail.
So, of course, they follow it for a while.
Why not?
And pretty soon they come to an entrance of a really big cave with rocks all around it. Outside of the cave entrance, among a bunch of huge rocks, they could see numerous bones. They couldn't tell from where they were sitting what kind of bones they were exactly. Their vehicle stopped a number of feet beyond the cave entrance. They stood outside of the vehicle, sweeping the area with their eyes. Soon, they spotted what looked to be pieces of a radio. It was. Upon closer inspection, they noted that it was most definitely parts of a U.S. military radio communication device shattered all over the ground. An ominous sign, but it looked like they were on the right track to locating the missing search unit.
At this point, the men have to assume that the missing unit had been attacked here, which led them to assume that there might be a danger still present in the area. They assumed a defensive stance with their weapons and continued to proceed very slowly and diligently closer to the entrance of the cave.
Nope. That's why Army guys are so cool, because if I saw bones and the remnants of a radio, I would not go there. I'd just be like, nah.
Well, you have to assume if there's bones at the cave entrance, then obviously there's going to be a freaking booby trap, and then the spikes come out with the skull stuck on it, and then you're going to hit a tripwire, and then there's going to be a big boulder rolling, and it's going to be some Indiana Jones shit.
Indiana Jones shit actually sounds fun in theory, but I bet in person it is not.
No, I'm not much of a runner.
I can do it.
I would be smashed by a boulder.
I feel like the boulder would roll up over me because I'm clumsy and I would just trip over something.
Have been a runner, but I'm really fat now because I like ice cream, so I don't run anymore.
I enjoy ice cream as well. Their fears proved to be true because very quickly, something came rushing out of the cave, and it moved so quickly that even though the men were ready, they were still taken by surprise. The men were being attacked by what appeared to be a man with bright red hair and a bright red beard who looked to be what they said was about 12 to 13 feet tall. Big old gingers. I can say that because I am one.
Gigantic ginger.
Gingantic.
Gigantor?
Yeah. Anyway, one of the men, whose name was Dan, advanced toward the giant while firing at it. The other men followed shortly behind Dan, firing their weapons as well. The giant leapt straight toward Dan and impaled him with a huge spear. If this isn't bad enough, after Dan was impaled on the weapon of this massive guy, the giant picked up the spear and held Dan on it in midair, further impaling the soldier while continuing his quick advance on the rest of them.
The soldiers are screaming at each other. Shoot him in the face! Shoot him in the face! As they frantically try to take down the man who's obviously intent on killing them all. The giant eventually fell dead after many bullets pierced through his body. But witnesses and shooters say that it took roughly 30 seconds for this to happen. Now, 30 seconds doesn't sound like a very long time, but when you're in a situation like that, if you take the time to count out 30 seconds, imagine you had something like this coming at you for that amount of time, and your certainty that you would come out of it alive was wavering.
If you really put yourself in the situation, once they saw Dan impaled on the spear and this guy just swinging him around like he's nothing and still coming at them, I'm sure it was horrifying. I would be terrified. At this point, the giant is down and it appears to be deceased. A helicopter was called in to haul the body of the massive man out of the area, and the pilot of this vessel was a person who would later be interviewed by L.A. Marzulli. You can find the interview online in one episode of his YouTube series called Watchers. In the interview, the pilot testifies that the giant weighed 1,100 pounds and he was between 10 and 15 feet in height. He, along with other witnesses, have stated that the giant of a man had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. Each of the fingernails and toenails had some sort of growth on them, like a fungus that had gone on for too long, and the edges of the nails were all irregular and misshapen. Dan was dead on arrival of the helicopter.
When they were positioning the man on the net to be carried away by the large Chinook helicopter, they also remarked that the giant man had a horrible stench on him, one that they could hardly bear. They said worse than a skunk, like he had already been dead for a long time.
When the helicopter started back to headquarters, they sent a message ahead stating that they were on their way back with a large, potentially human creature.
The helicopter pilot was also interviewed on Coast to Coast AM by George Norrie. So in this interview, one of the soldiers involved in the incident was interviewed, and Norrie asked him how he felt after the whole thing was over. He was sad and angry, he said. At first, for Dan, their fallen comrade, but also a huge amount of disdain for what happened next. The rescue unit was flown by helicopter out of the area and back to their headquarters, where they were then debriefed on the event. They were made to sign non-disclosure documents so that they could not reveal the occurrence or its details to anyone. This is why the men who were involved in the event and later agreed to be interviewed had to do so without disclosing their identity. It was a classified situation.
The unit wrote up a report on what happened, and it was sent back to them with orders to falsify the entire thing and not to mention anything in the official report about the giant. This confused the men. Why not?
The men who were interviewed by George Norrie and the ones interviewed by Marzulli were both interviewed without ID. In one interview, Marzulli asked his interviewee why he thinks that the government would hide this information from the people, and he answers, "My idea is that if things go exactly as the Bible says, they don't want it. If things go against Darwin's evolution, it can't be spoken out."
We also decided to go ahead and see what Snopes had to say about the story, even though I totally think Snopes is a sellout. Fake news Snopes. Since we had already heard about it from 3 different witnesses who had come forward under disguise, the Snopes article states that they spoke with a spokesman from the Department of Defense who stated that they do not have any record or information about a Special Forces member killed by a giant in Kandahar.
Of course they would say that.
Right.
They're the government.
Well, and if they didn't write it in the report, they don't have record of it.
Exactly.
So it's not a lie, but it's not true. Anyway.
Plausible deniability.
Yep. But if they had changed the official documents as the soldiers said they did, they wouldn't have record of this now, would they? On the Department of Defense's updates page for this time, there was no mention of a giant or even the initial unit of men who had disappeared in the first place.
So they just sweep all those people under the rug.
And the family wouldn't question it because they would just say, well, he was killed by a IED. They can tell them whatever they want. They're in Kandahar. How are they going to...
People are dying in large numbers,
Yeah, so it wouldn't be difficult to make a family believe something else.
You're listening to the Prescribed Films Podcast Network, home to hundreds of hours of free podcast entertainment. The shows on this network all have a common goal, providing you with the best discussions about movies and other forms of entertainment media. The PFPN hopes to fill your earholes with audio joy. Visit our website with links to all the other amazing shows at www.thepfpn.com. Thanks for listening.
So although this is a relatively recent event, the tales of a race of giants isn't particularly new. Along with these stories, almost always comes a warning to be heeded. A curse of sorts that tends to plague those who search for them and disturb the sites at which they rest.
In Season 1, Episode 4 of the Search for the Lost Giants television show on the History Channel, they talk about searching for lost giants in the Goshen Tunnel of Nan Madol, which is a small island off of Micronesia. A local farmer named Al Pirapan was interviewed here, in which he cautions the show's host in his search. Apparently, this man was a school teacher who was teaching in Nan Madol and cautions the host about not taking anything from the island. The story of the island is kind of a crazy tale. It has giant stone walls surrounding the entire thing that were obviously constructed, not natural by any means, but there are legends in the area of ancient giants. A local lore warns that the area is also cursed and that the people do not ever disturb what appears to be the burial sites of these primitive people or anything constructed on the island. Al Pirapan goes on to tell the host that there was a governor at one time there named Victor Berg, and around 1907 he went to the island with a team and dug burial mounds right up. The next day, he died. He did.
How mysterious.
We didn't know that would happen.
And macabre.
Very macabre.
Very macabre. Another hunter of giants, J.C. Brown, a mining engineer from Great Britain, decided to form a team for an expedition in 1913 to a cavern in Mount Shasta, California. He had previously explored this area, and deep in one of the caverns, he claimed to have found several mummified remains of giant people. He wanted to go back there and recover the remains. He completely and inexplicably vanished the night before they were set to leave, and he was never seen or heard from again. See, why couldn't we have been around at the time that these things were like, oh, we're going to start an expedition. Who wants to come? Anybody? Anybody?
I do. Me.
Me.
I will wagon train my ass clear. I guess it was like the 40s. We didn't really need a wagon train.
Sorry, Grandma. Let's get this wagon train a-moving.
Oh, it was 1913.
Sorry,
Still-
you died of dysentery.
Cholera.
You failed to ford the river.
Oh, we could have done it.
Bloop, bleep, bloop, you died.
I have a lot of faith in us. So in 1946, a doctor from Ohio was in Death Valley, California, when he claimed to have found 3 8-foot skeletons with golden spears in their hands. When he went back there to obtain proof of what he had found, since no one at all believed his story, he never came back. They did find his car sometime later near Devil's Hole in California, but no sign of the good doctor was ever found.
Why wouldn't you
Take a guy with you?
or not even a guy, just take the spear or something, you know what I mean? It's gold.
Yeah, I don't know, because I feel like if I found an artifact, I would not take it.
No, I wouldn't want to disturb it, but I guess now we've got cameras on our phones and we take pictures of everything, but they probably weren't as readily available then.
No, not in 1946.
I mean, you need to get a cardboard box and construct a pinhole camera.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't do that. He
You
didn't.
should have done that, doctor. Then there's the story of the Claverack giant. Apparently, gigantic bones were discovered along with huge teeth in Claverack, New York, clear back in 1705. The discovery made the pages of the Boston Newsletter, and 2 pretty important people of the time saw it. Cotton Mather and Edward Taylor separately researched the incident and provided write-ups to the public about it.
The original article in the Boston Newsletter was written up by the editor and printer of the paper, who was referred to as B. Green. The article read,
There is a prodigious tooth brought here, supposed by the shape of it to be the one far great tooth of man. It weighs 4 pounds and 3/4. The top of it as sound as a white tooth can be, but the root is much decayed. Yet one of the fangs of it holds half a pint of liquor. It was lately dug up, a great way under the ground, in the side of a bank or a hill, 30 or 40 foot above, at or near a place called Claverack, about 30 miles on the side of Albany, and is looked upon here as a mighty wonder. Whether the tooth be the man or beast, they also dug up several bones, which as they came to the air crumbled away. They say one of them is thought to be the thigh bone of 17 foot long. There is since another tooth taken up in the same place, which is a 4-tooth flat and broad, and as broad as a man's 4 fingers, which I have not yet seen. But the other I did see, and it is brought here by a gentleman of his assembly. They dug up several trees in the same place of great bigness.
Now, I'm not sure how knowledgeable the men who examined the teeth and bones were, and why they felt that the specimens that they found were human and not those of a large animal. It never really gives any idea as to what the credentials of these people were exactly, but it stirred up some curiosity for sure. It was later determined that they were likely the remains of a mastodon, but a letter regarding the second tooth from the governor, Joseph Dudley of New York, wrote the following in a letter to Cotton Mather.
Sir, I was surprised a few days since with a present laid before me from Albany, by 2 honest Dutchmen, inhabitants of the city, which a certain tooth accompanied, with some other pieces of bone, which being but fragments, without any points whereby they might be determined to what animals they did belong. I could make nothing of them, but the tooth was of perfect form, of the eye tooth of a man, with 4 prongs or roots, and 6 distinct faces and flats on the top, a little worn, and all perfectly smooth with the grinding. I suppose all the surgeons in town have seen it, and I'm perfectly of opinion that it was a human tooth. I measured it, and as it stood upright, it was 6 inches high, lacking 1/8, and its weight in the scale was 2 pounds and 4 ounces. Troy weight, one of the same growth, but not of equal weight, was last year presented to my lord Cornbury, and one of the same figure exactly was shrewd at Hartford, of near a pound weight more than this. Upon examination of the 2 Dutchmen, they tell me they said tooth and bones were taken up under the bank of the Hudson River, some miles below the city of Albany, about 50 leagues from the sea, many feet below the surface of the earth, in a place where the freshet does every year rake and waste the bank, and that there is a plain discoloration of the ground, for 75 feet long at least, different from the earth in color and substance, whereas judged by everyone to see it, to be the ruins and dust of the body that bore those teeth and bones. I am perfectly of opinion that the tooth will agree only to a human body, for whom the flood only could prepare a funeral, and without doubt he waited as long as he could keep his head above the clouds, but must be at length confounded with all other creatures and the new sediment, after the flood gave him the depth we now found. I remember to have read somewhere a tradition of Jewish rabbins, that the issues of those unequal matches between heaven and earth at the beginning, whose heads reached the cloud, who are, therefore, called Nephilim, and their issue was Geborim, who were then found not to be invincible, but fell before less men, the sons of the east in several places besides Canaan. I am not perfectly satisfied of what rank or class this fellow was, but I am not sure of the last, for Goliath was not half so many feet as this was long. The distance of the sea takes away all pretension of its being a whale or animal of the sea, as well as the figure of the tooth, nor could be any remains of an elephant. The shape of the tooth and measurement of the body in the ground will not allow that. J. Dudley.
Mather went on to write his own narrative, and as we know, Cotton Mather was a pretty famous Puritan congregational minister in the 1600s and 1700s who established a court in Salem, Massachusetts, to try the suspected witches there. He took this discovery to be very literal, straight from the Bible itself and its writings regarding the Nephilim, which we referenced at the very beginning of the episode. It does seem that the giants were mentioned a few times in the Bible, but the word Nephilim is actually only used twice, from what I understand. So we're not completely sure that they are the same thing. Were the Nephilim these half-god, half-human beings, and the giants mentioned merely large humans?
Now, it's easy to see how these puritanical people came to this conclusion, but I read another article that was written a bit later on telling this story and of the giant bones and teeth found in New York and how they were concluded to be that of the Nephilim by Cotton Mather and others. This article, though, mentioned that tusks were also found, and they were just discovered a little later after the initial write-ups occurred. It was determined to likely have been a giant mastodon that they had discovered and not, in fact, a giant person.
What a letdown.
Right? How disappointing. But maybe they were using the mastodon tusks as a weapon.
I think it was probably a mastodon. In that case, there are several cases of this happening. I say it was easy to see how they came to this conclusion, though, because we also read that upon the initial inspection, some of the long bones of the mastodon could be mistaken for those of a human, except obviously much bigger. The same goes for teeth. So there have been a few discoveries here that have been upended, but not all.
There are some that have been found and not necessarily disproven, especially those found in mounds that were obviously built by humans for the burial of such giants. The Dead Sea Scrolls even contained a book of giants referring to the birth of giants called the Nephilim who were present on earth prior to the Great Flood, during which Noah filled his ark and survived with a few of each of earth's creatures. During the pre-flood times, it is said that, quote, the sons of God, end quote, looked upon the earth and saw the daughters of men. Thinking them to be beautiful, they came down to earth against the will of God and mated with them. The daughters of man bore children of the angels, and these were the Nephilim that are also mentioned many times throughout the Bible. So the word Nephilim is said to mean the fallen ones upon English translation, but this translation has been debated a few times, so I guess that's kind of a loose translation.
So the fathers of the Nephilim were referred to as, quote, the sons of God. That's the thing about this, is that throughout this episode, we're going to have every religion, it changes just a little bit. And even within, for example, Christianity, there's some people who are contending with each other about every little detail too. So, I mean, there's 6 different people saying, well, the fallen ones mean this. The fallen ones mean this. So I don't know. It's just hard to say. There were tons of different interpretations. So I just kind of picked the ones that seem the most common. Okay, so it seems to be under constant debate as to who the sons of God actually were, since scripture isn't exactly specific on this point. Some people say that they were simply the angels, but others contest this, calling it blasphemous, because the Bible states that the angels were made complete by God and were unable to mate with humans, as they were unable to cross from spirit to flesh. Apparently, only God has the ability to make this happen, and the only entity to have ever crossed from spirit to flesh was Jesus. So we're not biblical scholars here, but this does make sense.
So who were the sons of God that the Bible referred to as having fathered the Nephilim? Obviously, we're unsure, but We do know that often it seems that the giants and Nephilim are kind of lumped together as though they were one and the same. Remember earlier when we considered that possibly the Nephilim and giants were simply separate, unrelated entities altogether? We think that this is where that makes the most sense. The Nephilim seem to be these creatures who were the children of the sons of God and daughters of human men in the book Genesis. We're led to believe that the Nephilim were a large part of why God sent the great flood to earth, and that the Nephilim did not survive the flood, as they don't seem to have been mentioned afterward. The giants, however, were. They were mentioned a lot after the flood.
There's a story in the Bible that mentions a giant by the name of Og, and it seems that he was the last recorded giant that lived east of the Jordan River. There were a few other giants in Israel at this time as well, and apparently they terrorized the men living there constantly. One of these giants was named Goliath.
The story of David and Goliath was a pretty famous one that a lot of us grew up hearing. David was a young man who a prophet said would be instrumental in the battle against the Philistine army and become king. Everyone laughed at this until their army was challenged during a battle by a giant of a man named Goliath who fought for the Philistine army. Goliath told the men if any of their men could defeat him in a fight, then the Philistine army would back down. David happened to be bringing supplies up to the warriors and heard of this. David decided to volunteer to fight against Goliath in battle, even though he wasn't even a warrior. He used a sling and a rock as his weapon of choice, hitting the giant between the eyes with the rock during their battle and killing him. David was made king of Israel.
Take that. Supposedly his brothers were all mad too because they were warriors and they were like, "What are you doing? Gonna fight this giant?" And then David went in there and whooped Goliath's butt, and then there was jealousy.
But he was king then, so it didn't matter.
Yeah, so tough rocks. Get it? Because it was a rock.
Tough rock.
Yes.
Dad jokes galore.
Yep. Another biblical story regarding giants is found in Deuteronomy, in which the tribe of Moab went to battle with a race of giants called Emim. The tribe of Moab won the battle, destroyed the giants, and settled the land on which the giants previously resided. The story strangely relates to a modern-day situation that some call a conspiracy. And we all love a good conspiracy, right?
That's why we're here.
Right, it is. In 2017, the United States dropped a bomb on a huge cave inhabited by ISIS troops and reportedly killed 94 of them. Strangely, though, a whistleblower came forward to claim that getting rid of this large number of ISIS troops was part of the plan. But also, the United States was trying to kill a group of giants who lived in the same tunnel system. Strangely, the name of the bomb was Moab, which means massive ordnance air blast, and it is affectionately referred to as the mother of all bombs, but also holds the same name as that tribe in Israel who defeated the giants and took their land. It may be a coincidence, but it's a weird one, and an unlikely one at that.
The Bible often refers to the different tribes of giants and states that many of them had 6 fingers and 6 toes, which is crazy because that's just the way that the soldiers described the one that attacked the troops in Kandahar.
We found an article written for the New York Times dated May 25th, 1882 that read,
"The bones of a giant found in St. Paul, Minnesota, May 24th. A skull of heroic size and singular formation has been discovered among the relics of mound builders in the Red River Valley. The mound was 60 feet in diameter and 12 feet high. Near the center were found the bones of about a dozen men and women, mixed with the bones of various animals. The skull in question was the only perfect one, and near it were found some abnormally large body bones. The man who bore it was evidently a giant. A thorough investigation of the mound and its content will be made by a historical society."
The mounds throughout North America have many times been found to house the remains of giants or people of very large stature, and were said to have been put in place by Native Americans of the areas.
In 1871 in Cayuga, New York, it was reported that over 200 skeletal remains had been found inside of a mound that had collapsed itself. The skeletons were very, very well preserved and intact. It was written that the skeletons were those of men who were of gigantic stature, and some of them measuring 9 feet, very few of them being less than 7 feet.
In another New York town called Dunville, there was actually the discovery of an entire lost city in which weaponry such as axes and tomahawks were noted, as well as pipes and beads. At this site, they also dug up skeletal remains, and it was written that, quote, "the skull of which are of an enormous size and in all manner of shape, some being twice the size of a normal human."
So I wonder if the weapons were bigger.
Yeah.
Did they mention that?
I don't think so in that situation. But in other archaeological finds, there were weapons. We'll talk about one of them that were
big.
like way bigger that humans were not going to use.
In Indiana, there are several of those mounds, and several findings of giant skeleton remains have been recorded. In Jennings County, Indiana, in 1881, a 9-foot-tall person was dug up, and with presumably her were the remains of a blonde-haired child.
We found an article written for a newspaper called The World, dated Sunday, October 6th, 1895, that is entitled Biggest Giant Ever Known, and talks about a presumed California Indian person who was 9 feet high. It says that they exhumed this person near San Diego, but that there was no record of anyone living there that had been so tall. It partially reads, quote,
The mummy is of an Indian, and it's almost certainly prehistoric, though its age cannot be determined with any sort of accuracy. Historical records of the part of California where it was found go back at least 250 years, and they make no mention of any man of gigantic stature. The body was found in a cave by a party of prospectors. Over the head are the remnants of a leather hood.
There is a drawing associated with this article in which the remains of this man look to be propped up in a box, and standing next to it is what appears to be an average-sized man, mimicking the position of the mummy for scale. You can find the link to this article in our show notes.
In Franklin, Kentucky in 1884, there were a bunch of skeletons found in a farm field. They were carefully extracted from the ground, and researchers were very surprised to note that one of the skeletons was about twice the size of a grown male human.
In Illinois, there were several burial mounds found in an area that were also carefully excavated. They also found the bones of people of giant proportions. In the center of the mound, it was a huge pit, and the skeletons were buried sitting upright against the wall of the pit with their legs stretched out in front of them.
In 1913, there was a discovery made on Catalina Island off of the coast of California that I thought was really interesting. A German naturalist named A.W. Furstenon discovered remains on the island that measured about 8 feet. After spending some time in Mexico and hearing stories about the island inhabiting a race of giants who were no longer there. Later, a man named Ralph Glidden went to the island to do some digging of his own on behalf of his employer, Hay Foundation of New York. It's said that Ralph dug on the island from 1918 to 1930 and unearthed over 3,700 skeletons. Many of these skeletons on Catalina Island were over 7 feet tall, and one even measured over 9 feet. Subsequent visits to the site to investigate these claims have said to have proven them to be truthful. Which is crazy.
In Steelville, Missouri, 1933, there was an article with a photo in the local newspaper, the Steelville Ledger, dated June 11th. Part of the article reads,
He turned up the complete skeleton of an 8-foot giant. The grisly find was brought to R.C. Parker here, and stretched out to its enormous length in the hallway of his office, where it has since been remained, the most startling exhibit Steelville has ever had on the public view.
The photo with the article shows the skeleton stretched out with a man lying next to it. The man's name is said to have been Les Eaton, who himself measures 6 feet. The skeleton does appear much longer than him.
The Chickasaba Mound in Arkansas was found to be a burial place for many skeletons, many of them ranging from 8 to 9 feet in height.
The craziest report that we came across here is one reported in the Oil City Times of West Hickory, Pennsylvania in 1870. It reads,
On Tuesday morning last, while Mr. W. M. Thompson, assisted by Robert R. Smith, was engaged in making an excavation near the house of the former, about half a mile north of West Hickory, they exhumed an enormous helmet of iron which was corroded with rust. Further Diffing brought to light a sword, which measured 9 feet in length. Curiosity incited them to enlarge the hole, discovered the bones of 2 enormous feet. Following up the lead, they had also unexpectedly struck. In a few hours' time, they had unearthed a well-preserved skeleton of an enormous giant belonging to the species of the human family which probably inhabited this and other parts of the world at that time, of which the Bible speaks, when it says, "And there were giants in those days." The helmet is said to be the shape of those found among the ruins of Nineveh. The bones of the skeleton were remarkably white. The teeth are all in their places, all of them double, and of extraordinary size. These relics have been taken to Tionesta, where they are visited by a large number of people daily. When this giant ship was in flesh, he must have stood 18 foot in his stockings. These remarkable relics will be forwarded to New York early next week. The joints of the skeleton are now being glued together. These remains were found about 12 feet below the surface of the mound, which had been flown up probably centuries ago, and which was not more than 3 feet above the level of the ground around it. Here is another nut for antiquarians to crack.
There was also the legend of the Saiteca giants in Nevada. Apparently, there was a race of red-haired cannibalistic giant people who lived there in close proximity to the Paiute tribe of the Native American people who also inhabited the area. The Saiteca giants terrorized the Native Americans and would often kidnap and eat members of the tribe.
That would be incredibly inconvenient.
But technically, is it cannibalism if you're eating people that are smaller than you? It's not quite your race. It's just, the food chain, right? Is it cannibalism still?
They're still human.
Are they, though?
Humanoid.
Are they, though?
That's what they say.
Okay. The Paiute people got pretty irritated about it, and with good reason, and decided to deal with the problem. The story is that different tribes within the Paiute people got together and made up an army challenging the giants. They did well to defeat and kill most of the giants, but a few of them escaped into what is now known as Lovelock Cave. The Native Americans stood outside of the cave and told them to come out. The giants didn't want to do that, so the Paiute people sent flaming arrows soaring into the cave, setting it on fire and burning the remaining giants alive.
So that's that.
We do not burn our ginger giants.
Well, they do if they're eating your friends on a rotisserie. And that's all great, because we have lots of stories like that in text and newspaper articles. But this one is really cool because apparently in 1924, a group of men from the Guano Mining Company were in the cave mining for bat poop and accidentally came across a bunch of artifacts. They notified archaeologists who came to take a look at this, and sure enough, a crap load of artifacts.
It's funny because they were mining guano.
Yeah, crap. It was a crap load.
Get it?
Yeah, over 10,000, actually. Not only that, but they also found people. One red-haired male and one red-haired female. The male was 8 feet tall, while the female was 6.5 feet tall.
A few years later, in 1931, in a lake bed near Lovelock, Nevada, 2 other red-haired giants were found. They were 8.5 feet tall and 10 feet tall. Yet another was found in the area 8 years later in 1939, and this one was 7 foot 7 inches tall. It's said that their remains are still there in the local Humboldt Museum, but they are not on public display, which is not fair.
Well, one person, it was like a travel blog or something. Someone from that area wrote about Lovelock Cave, and I was reading that article. And I think basically what you have to do is just go ask them if you can see them. I don't think they keep them out because I don't know if they're worried someone will steal them or vandalize them or what. They're locked up more securely.
So we need a road trip and go ask to see them?
Apparently, because, she made it sound like you can see them. They don't hide them away from people. They must be like in a back room or a vault or something. I don't know. As far as Native American legends of giants, almost every single tribe has its own legend.
The Comanche Indians were said to have dealt with cannibalism of 10-foot tall people who were rich and powerful. When the giants became too proud, forgetting justice and mercy, the Great Spirit wiped them out, and there lies the Tennessee Mounds.
Leave it to the Great Spirit, right? The Choctaw Indians recorded that when they came to Tennessee, just past the Mississippi River, they had run-ins with a race of giants that they had to fight and kill whenever they came across one, because the giants were very powerful and cannibalistic people. They called them the Nahulo.
The Navajo encountered giant white people who were adept in mining with great technology who enslaved the weaker people, and it's not said what became of them.
Speaking of people with technology in the ancient times, remember our megalith episode? Well, while many people claim sites such as Stonehenge, Easter Island, and the pyramids of Giza, and other impossibly constructed structures of the like were the result of alien technology, there are a great number of people who believe that these were constructed by a giant race of people of lore, which of course we're open to.
And we did specifically forget to mention giants in that episode. Mm-hmm. And I was really upset about it after we did it. So I was like, that's a really big
theory.
Yeah.
Well, I think when we did the megalith episode, we were mostly there was so much on each theory. We kind of had to pick one and kind of go with the alien theory.
Aliens were really important.
Yeah. And I think there was a lot more to the alien theory than the giant theory.
When Easter Island was first visited in 1722 by a Dutch explorer named Jacob Roggeveen, he was actually looking for another island, which is a whole other interesting story that we won't get into today. It was called Terra Australis, and for Jacob's whole life, his father had been obsessed with it. Terra Australis was an island that was thought at one time to have existed in the Indian Ocean, which turned out to be completely imaginary. The island, not the ocean. But he did come across this incredibly remote island in the southeastern Pacific, and it was inhabited. He arrived on Easter Sunday of 1722, and so it was called Easter Island. Apparently, on arrival and upon meeting the natives, something led them to draw their weapons and open fire. They killed several of the natives before leaving the island.
We all know that Easter Island is home to some pretty impressive and enormous monoliths that line the coast there. Some of them are over 70 feet tall. While explorer Roggeveen did mention in his ship's logs that the natives were very large in stature, another man who was present in the group described his account of them in more detail. He wrote that they were greeted by natives who stood more than 12 feet high.
With truth, I might say that these savages are all of more than gigantic size. The men are tall and broad in proportion, averaging 12 feet in height. Surprisingly as it may appear, the tallest men on board our ship could pass between the legs of the children of the Goliath without bending a head.
So is this how the giant monoliths were built? Simply by giant people? Although in Roggeveen's logs, he did note to wonder at their construction because the island was so incredibly barren of timber and stone of any strength with which they would have been able to construct tools to move the large rocks. It's a mystery. That's where the aliens come in to help the giants.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's talk in Ireland of a great... There's talk in Ireland of a great race of giants who were people of color who sailed from Africa to Spain and then onward to England. They are said to have been responsible for the construction of Stonehenge.
I would assume, though, that the giants who would be able to move the stones that construct Stonehenge would have to be even larger than the typically extremely tall nature of some of the tribes of Africa, such as the Watusi or the Dinka tribe. There are tons of Africans who are genetically very tall. Manute Bal was a man from Sudan who played basketball and was recorded to have been 7 foot 7 inches tall. There's a photo online of him standing flat-footed at the bottom of the basketball hoop and reaching straight up to touch the rim.
In North Wales, a 64-pound sledgehammer was discovered. Dating back to the Bronze Age, it had a 9-foot handle. Now, I don't know a thing about sledgehammers, but we did read that the biggest one you can really find is typically about 20 pounds. And that would kind of suck to sling around for any length of time. This one was determined by archaeologists to likely have been wielded by a person who had to be up to 18 feet tall.
As recently as World War II, there were giants reported, believe it or not. Japanese soldiers stated that they had experienced encounters with men in the Guadalcanal that were 10 to 15 feet tall and extremely hostile and aggressive. They usually had a weapon, such as a club, and took a lot more bullets than a regular person before it seemed fazed by them.
This goes hand in hand with the fact that local history and lore is rich with claims of existence of giants as well as contentious relationships with them in the Guadalcanal and throughout the Solomon Islands. Supposedly, this isn't even completely history. It's said that the giants still inhabit small parts of the area, including Santa Isabel Island and the island of Chisol. On the huge 80 by 300 kilometer island of Chisol, there are villages that line the edges, but none in the center of the island, because in the center live the giants. Nearby where the giants are said to currently live, there's a burial place with bones scattered about. Giant bones just lying around on the ground. There is also said to be a hut in one of the villages there with an 8-foot-long human femur bone used as the hut's main support pole. That's cool as shit.
I mean, why would you not? Another story of the Guadalcanal is that of the area's finance minister. It is said that he was driving along a remote side road while exploring a place called Gold Ridge when his Toyota Hilux truck slid off the road and got stuck. They weren't able to get it out, so they went ahead and walked down the road to the closest village that they could find, trying to get help. They returned with more men to help them push the truck out. Upon walking back to the truck, they witnessed 2 other men who they described as being 15 feet tall, standing next to the truck, one large man at the front, one large man at the back, carrying the truck and placing it back onto the road. The men made such a commotion, screaming and running away, that it scared the 2 large men back into the woods. They didn't come back out. So the finance minister approached the truck and examined the enormous footprints near it. He had to believe what he had seen. 2 giant men putting his truck back on the road for him.
So they were friendly giants.
They were super considerate. They were like, this guy obviously can't do this and needs some help. So
and we can do it.
We got you.
Also during World War II, a man named Ivan T. Sanderson, an author, tells the story of being present on a crew running bulldozers at a dig site when they hit upon what looked like a graveyard. They pulled out several craniums that each measured 22 to 24 inches from base to crown. If the people were proportionate, it's estimated that these people had to have been about 12 feet tall.
Now, I think I was mistaken in that paragraph, actually, because we're going to get into that story a little bit later on, but Ivan T. Sanderson wasn't present. He was a researcher who later on followed up about the story.
Oh, okay.
So sorry about that.
You ever see that meme with the Colonel Sanders head and then the bow tie is like arms and legs?
Yeah.
Once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Yep.
That's what I'm saying. Maybe they just had big heads.
Maybe. And like bat wings.
Big head and little arms.
So here we have a supposed legend. We see references to it in ancient texts such as the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Bible, in folklore and in children's stories throughout history, movies, Greek and Roman history, newspaper accounts, and more. All over the world, in various cultures, and throughout our lives, we've had the idea of giants shoved down our throats. We've been tricked by various hoaxes involving supposedly discovered giants, but we've also seen what looks to be credible evidence. One archaeologist, Jim Vieira, has been accumulating accounts of giants in North America for years, and he has collected over 1,500 of them from various news sources and clippings throughout the history of the country. So why isn't this a bigger deal? Why do we continue to ask if they exist or not? Why is it a question? Why do so many of the corporate archaeological giants, of the world continue to deny the existence? Well, there's a theory for that.
I feel like I should have found one of the giant fairy tales and seen if there was a specific story which they were rooted from.
Like
know?
Jack and the Beanstalk?
Yeah.
With the giant?
Dang it.
Mm-hmm. And lots of stories of ogres and cyclops and, lots of stuff like that.
Anyway, if a person were to claim that a large-scale corporate archaeologist and the Smithsonian were deliberately covering up evidence of giants or deliberately discrediting actual finds, it wouldn't be a new accusation by any means. From many of these discoveries throughout history, several skeletons of giant stature have allegedly been sent to the Smithsonian and other large-scale research universities to be studied and then displayed in various museums. Often there are artifacts found with the remains, and they are also sent along with the skeletons. There are many of these claims out there. However, in the huge majority of these situations, the human remains do not end up on display. They often end up misplaced, or no answer is given when someone inquires about the remains. For example, the giant remains that were obviously humanoid at Lovelock Cave were mentioned before in Nevada. Those were discovered by researchers by the names of Pugh and Hart. A man named L.L. Loud, who is a researcher at the University of California, sent these on to the Smithsonian. And apparently, the local museum in Nevada did manage to retain some of the specimens, including large skulls that are, in fact, present in the museum along with some artifacts. But the Smithsonian and the corporate museum at the University of California both do not have them displayed and give little answers to where they are. There are a lot of situations like this across America, so this leads a lot of people to speculate that the existence and evidence of giant race of people is intentionally being covered up.
Why would they do this?
Why would you do that?
Why it's interesting that you should ask. An article on the Gaia website points to a claim made by Richard Dewhurst, who authored a book called The Ancient Giants Who Ruled America. He claims that the U.S. Director of Ethnology in 1879, who was running the Smithsonian at the time, a man by the name of Wesley Powell, wrote up a document called the Powell Doctrine that was issued on behalf of the Smithsonian Institute. The doctrine said, quote,
"No anthropological research should consider any talk of lost tribes henceforth, while also describing the natives as uncultured, savage, and lacking signs of higher intellect. Hence it will be seen that it is legitimate to use any pictographic matter of a date anterior to the discovery of the continent by Columbus for historic purposes."
This is strange. Why would they not want it to be made public that ancient tribes of people existed here prior to the time of the Columbus discovery and the Native Americans that existed here only then? This is weird.
Later claims are made that many scientists just don't trust the things that the government have done in the past, such as careless and shady-ass experiments and programs that have existed. Apparently, it's thought that some scientists intentionally suppress this evidence because they don't want the government trying to extract DNA and clone these people for militaristic purposes, which is so something that the government would do. Possibly far-fetched, but it's not. But I would have to agree that I don't think the government needs to be doing that. I also agree that I don't trust the government not to.
That sounds so right up their alley.
Right?
It would be something we read about like 40 years from now. It'd be unlocked in the document dump, reading about them trying to clone the giants and some horrific shit that came from it. Other people claim that evidence is being covered up because it doesn't fit the archaeological narrative that is already in place.
We all know that you have to fit the narrative.
That is an awful lot of history books to rewrite and a whole lot of important people's life's work being proven wrong.
You know that we are obviously open to things of the conspiratorial nature.
Hell yes, we are.
But we can vouch for some of this having a logical explanation. We have to give credit to the Micah Hanks website, on which there is a large article with a ton of great points regarding both sides of this argument. If you're interested in this article, it's called The Big Buried Secret, Giant Skeletons, and the Smithsonian. We will touch on a number of things that he presented now, though, mixed with some of our own thoughts, which can be dangerous.
Yes, it can.
While there is evidence all over the world and texts that support the possible existence of giants being 12, 15, and 20 feet in height, a lot of the remains found in the mounds and some of the ones at Lovelock Cave that seem to have been presented to these institutions are said to have been called giants at 6'5" to 7 feet tall. While it isn't super common for people to reach these heights, it's not unheard of either. Many of us, if not nearly all of us, have known or come across a person in our own lives who was in this height range.
Sam here dated a guy in high school who was 6'7", and he was enormous. He was a big, tall guy.
He was a tall guy.
Shout out Leif. Leif does not listen to us.
Piggybacks were scary. Would an institution such as the Smithsonian be that interested in skeletal remains of a person of this height? Not likely. It may have just simply been not deemed museum display worthy.
Not only that, but many of the newspaper reports that we read claiming to have discovered giants discovered people more in the 12 to 15 height range also reported that the, quote, skeletons turned to dust when the air touched them or when they were moved. So, this would leave no evidence except for some of the photos we came across with people of average height next to them for scale. And while we're not saying that these photos over time have all been fake, some of them were found to have been fake. Plus, even if a photo wasn't faked somehow, it really isn't concrete evidence, due to the fact that it is possible that it was, and the skeleton had not been tested by credible scientists. Plus, unfortunately, it wasn't uncommon in the early years of journalism for articles of satirical nature to be presented to the public as real for entertainment purposes. It just wasn't. This is well known and admitted. So even if there were credible and factual articles written and photos taken, they were likely mixed right in with a lot of faked ones. So how do we know what's what?
Kind of like mermaids.
Right. I agree.
Not that I'm saying there's not a possibility that mermaids were real. I'm just saying that there were a lot of fake mermaid skeletons out there.
There was a lot of that crap going around.
So to contrast this, remember the story that we told you earlier about men who were bulldozing during World War II? Well, there was a pretty credible zoologist who came along in the 60s named Ivan Sanderson, and he heard this story too. Becoming extremely interested in it, he tracked down members of this unit in an attempt to verify the story and the fate of the remains that were found by them, since they would have actually been evidence of giants who were taller than just a tall person. Sanderson did find a few members of the unit to corroborate and verify the story, and he was told that the remains were gathered and retrieved by the Smithsonian. However, when he delved into it further, the Smithsonian had no record of this finding or having taken the specimens. What a cliche.
It's like either it's kind of a cover-up or they are just incredibly negligent when it comes to their specimens, and they're always losing them.
Right?
I give a couple examples in this. There were a lot.
Too much for it to be that.
Yeah.
For a museum. You have one job.
Take this from here to here. So, when we're talking about the claims that have been made alleging a conspiracy to suppress the existence of giants, we've got several factors at play here. Specimens obtained that were likely less than impressive or remarkable, so they probably wouldn't be displayed necessarily. We've got specimens that were claimed to have been found but too delicate to remove, so they weren't taken anywhere to be examined, which really just amounts to a good story with no concrete proof. And then we have claims of skeletons that were enormous being removed, and then the Smithsonian disappears them. But again, Even though we do believe that things like this happen, there is no proof. Claims are claims and facts are facts, so as far as conspiracy here goes, we don't know.
Some people believe that giants were simply people who were experiencing a rare disorder of an overactive pituitary gland, gigantism, which is definitely a thing, and it seems like it would be a reasonable conclusion if it weren't for one fact. Statistics seems to state that gigantism is extremely, and I mean extremely, rare. Like 3 people out of every million rare. In the history of America, there is less than 100 recorded cases of gigantism ever. So if this is the case, why are there so many of them mentioned in text throughout history, including scripture? Many times in the Bible, it mentions tribes of giants. How in the world would they have found enough of each other to have formed a tribe if this was the case? Facebook.
Yeah, he got on the Facebook.
Seeking other giants. G seeking G. ASLH. Age, sex, location, height.
Yeah, I got it.
Do not qualify for our group.
You can't sit with us.
On Wednesdays, we wear pink. It seems much more unlikely to us for gigantism to be the answer than to just think that there may have been an ancient race of actual giants on Earth at one time. But I digress.
Also, people with gigantism usually reach 7 to 8 feet tall, not 12 to 15 feet tall as it is mentioned in text. So is this the case? You'll have to decide that one on your own.
That's what we have for you this week on Bigfoot for Breakfast, and we hope you loved it as much as we loved talking about it. Don't forget to push the subscribe button on whichever podcast platform you're listening from, and if you're feeling super generous, please leave us a good rating and review. If you want to contact us, you can do so via email at bigfootforbreakfast@outlook.com, Facebook message, or you can call us at 641-891-2635. Just leave us a voicemail and we'll play it on the next episode. We appreciate you listening to this week, and don't forget to check us out next week around Tuesday-ish.
Tuesday to Thursday?
Sometimes Friday.
We're horrible.
For a new weird episode.
I also want to take the time once again to thank our Facebook friend Oscar for the suggestion for this episode. He really got the ball rolling and introduced this as something we had never heard of before. So thank you again, Oscar, and thank you for listening seriously.
Woo, 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 woo. In the name of giants.
Come at me, bro.